Hi, my name is Jennifer Smith Parker, Director of Insights at Biospace, and you're listening to Denatured. In this episode, you'll hear from Hannah Franklin, Associate at Biovance Capital, and Pablo Gabriel Lopez, Director of Life Science Investment at Caixa Capital Risc. We explore the rise of Southern Europe's biotech ecosystem, from Portugal's push to translate strong science into startups to Spain's capital and talent, and what it will take for the region to compete on a global stage. Hannah and Pablo, thank you so much for joining this episode of Denatured, where we're going to be talking about the Iberian Peninsula and the investment there, as well as tying that into the broader European landscape as part of this series. If you can please introduce yourselves, that would be great. Hannah, why don't we start with you?
Sure. Hi, Jennifer. It's great to see you again, and thank you for having me. My name's Hannah Franklin. I'm a British neuroscientist by training and an associate at Biovance Capital. Biovance is Portugal's only dedicated biotech VC fund, founded in 2024, and the founding team has raised over 60 million euros to invest in early stage innovative and disease modifying therapeutics at the preclinical stage across all disease areas and modalities.
Perfect. Pablo, go ahead. We'll go to you.
Yeah, thank you for the invitation, Jennifer. Pleasure to be here. I'm also a scientist by training, and I've been at Biovance for the last 8 years already, first as a principal, and a year later I was appointed director of responsible for the investments in life science space. Criteria Bioventure is the specialized venture capital firm within the Criteria Caixa Holding, which is the company that manages the wealth of Caixa Foundation, which is one of the largest foundations worldwide.
Brilliant. Well, that's a fantastic introduction. So let's go ahead and kick this off. So, Hannah, we know that, as you said, Biovance is the only dedicated biotech VC in Portugal, and the focus is on Portugal and Southern Europe. So I'm curious, do you see Portuguese companies as needing to plug into Northern European syndicates to survive, or is Southern Europe beginning to build enough critical mass to finance its early pipeline?
I think it's a really important question. I think, to be honest, both are true and not necessarily mutually exclusive. I think the tide is turning. Life sciences startups in Portugal have more than doubled in the last 6 years, and specialist funds like Biovance exist when they didn't before. But obviously, biotech is collaborative by nature, and we can't think of ourselves in a vacuum. I think the real question isn't necessarily whether we need international co-investors. I think we definitely do, especially for larger Series A rounds and beyond, and that's fine. I think that's how all ecosystems mature. But I think that the real question is whether companies in Southern Europe are being pushed north out of necessity, or whether they're able to pull international capital south on their own terms. And Biovance's role really is to be that local conviction layer to enable the latter. We're scientists first before we are investors, and we run deep scientific diligence. We've got long-standing relationships with universities locally, institutes, founders, advisors, CROs, the list goes on. And then through the relationships that we're building with international investors, we can then give them the confidence to follow. I think our portfolio is really good proof. Mondego Bio, who are developing cancer immunotherapies out of Biocant Park here in Portugal, we led their Series A and co-invested with OrbiMed, one of the largest biotech VCs in the world, with I think over $17 billion under management, as well as with Torrey Pines. And that's international capital coming to Portugal. Another example with Ligo Bio, they're based in the Netherlands. This is our second portfolio company, but they've established a Portuguese subsidiary and they're hiring local talent here. So the relationship does flow both ways. And honestly, as a British neuroscientist who now works at a Portuguese biotech VC, I'm also living proof that the pull is real.
Yeah, that's such an interesting point, as you're saying, kind of tying it to the broader European landscape. And that seems to be a common theme throughout the series as well. When it comes to Barcelona, we know that's a strong starting point in the region. But how also does that connection with Barcelona, how is that connected with the rest of Europe when it comes to life science investment and the broader ecosystem?
Well, I think we have been operating in the ecosystem for long enough now to become another player in Europe. So there's a lot of interconnections through the years in the companies. So fortunately, for the last 15 years, companies that has been initiated here in Spain have received significant funding international VCs, both corporates and traditional VCs. And also, I mean, this allows us to not only Criteria Venture, but also other local investors to play a role in Europe, but also in US. Of course, I mean, Europe is our main focus, but I believe that I would say that Barcelona or Catalonia in general is seen as another hub in Europe, and we don't see much difference between other regions.
That makes sense. I'm curious too, swinging back to you, Hannah, when it comes to Portugal, and especially I think coming after Bio Europe, which was obviously a giant coup for Portugal. So I've heard many times that Portugal has long had a strong science, but less of the infrastructure needed to translate that science into biotech companies. So, where do you see the biggest bottlenecks today in moving from academic output to investable ventures? And actually, Pablo, that question may be relevant for you too about any bottlenecks moving from academic to investable ventures.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. The first thing that I really want to reiterate is that the bottleneck has never been scientific quality, right? Like we have proof of that. Ricardo, Biovance's founder and managing partner, previously identified promising science at Nova Medical School here in Lisbon, while at our predecessor fund, and that later became CellMabs, which was then later acquired by BioNTech for potentially $1 billion. And that was the largest deal ever in Portugal, and in fact, the largest exit across all sectors in Europe in Q1 24. Principal, in a similar way, invested in science from the Institute of Molecular Medicine in Lisbon, whilst at Portugal Ventures. And that later became Limfact, which was acquired by Gamma Delta Therapeutics and later by Takeda. And these aren't flukes, they're examples of what happens when someone with the right scientific lens and the right relationships is actually looking, in the right place. The science was there; it just needed to be found. So to go back to your point about the bottlenecks, I think there's a few that we're actively trying to address and support. Obviously, we can't do it alone. I think firstly, know-how. We're still building the playbook for spinning out companies, and there is limited track record to follow. I think, secondly, smart capital and international relationships. Portuguese institutes haven't really been on the radar of investors who can validate the science, provide guidance and support, help build strong teams with track records, open doors to global networks, co-investors, strategic partners. So that's precisely the gap that my colleagues built Biovance to fill. Another potential bottleneck is the commercial maturity of the tech transfer offices at universities. I think this is definitely improving, but there's still work to do there. And I think fourth, and what's an important one to mention is the density of the ecosystem. I've seen this firsthand. I grew up in London and worked in London for a long time. Cities like London, Boston, Switzerland, in Switzerland, they often run on these sort of serendipitous interactions, right? The chance conversation at a conference or a networking drinks where you, I don't know, meet a potential co-founder or lead investor. That sort of informal connective tissue is really, really valuable. And it's something that Portugal is still building. And I just want to mention one final and critical gap that I think doesn't get quite enough attention is the space between academic grants and that first institutional check. I think it's important to mention Portugal benefits from really good public funding through instruments like PRR and the EU Horizon programs. Projects have really strong access to non-dilutive funding, but there is still a gap before that sort of pre-€1 million pound ticket, that window where great science and teams are still sort of stalling. We often talk about the gap at the sort of later stage in the larger rounds, but this gap is really important. So we really do need to see more incubators and accelerators that can help bridge that gap and provide not just the capital, but the training and support to turn really good academic research into, independent investable biotech companies.
Yeah, Pablo, I love your perspective too. I mean, I think Sheena has mentioned a lot of really great points in the sense of some of the potential bottlenecks. So,
well, that's fantastic. I mean, she definitely touched a lot of very relevant points. So, I mean, I think everything started with good science, good scientists, good translational research as well. And this, of course, I mean, from research to bring some innovation, I mean, takes a while. We were lucky enough that back in 2000s there was very strong support in terms of research funding and translational research included, and that's helps a lot to bring very good high quality scientists to the region, right? So, and then of course, I mean, when you look at for good opportunities, you can find it anywhere. In fact, actually, one of our first investment was in Sunnyfit. That was a technology a spin out from Balearic Islands, so actually in Mallorca. And this is a company that, after receiving more than 100 millions, I think it was around 140 million through different series of round. Series D was the last one, in which we were the larger investor. We sold this company to buy for few years ago for over a billion euros, right? So, and this is something that sometimes is difficult to believe that you're going to start a company coming from an island in Spain, and that years later you're going to sell it to an international company, right? But it's all about good quality science, and of course, it's important the support from the governments and regional governments that make that effort. We're not going to go that far on the initial stages, but of course, from the good science, we have already a good instrument first in our case, and I think it's good for the whole Spanish and Portuguese ecosystem. We have the foundation, which is supporting significantly research and innovation through different grants, and in particular, actually to support entrepreneurship. We have since 10, 15 years ago, different venture capital firms also investing in ecosystem. We have a strong support from the government providing institutional funding for tech transfer and early stage investment, in particular in Spain. Tech transfer office that Hannah mentioned, this is an important link. I don't think we are still there as many other countries. They're not very sophisticated, but it's true that they have improved significantly through the years. So now you can definitely approach many of them, and they understand the business and they facilitate tech transfer. There's still some, of course, missing links. I don't think we have a strong entrepreneurial ecosystem, but this is not because we don't have talented people. It's just because you have to go through the process, and this is something that takes more time than people think. And when we think about the U.S. model on 5 years since investment and exit, and you have this cycle, I mean, this is no longer the case. I mean, in many cases, most of the cases in our countries, in Spain and Portugal and many other ecosystems, it requires more time. So that means that someone which is a first-time entrepreneur may take 10 years to be recycled, let's say, in the system, in ecosystem, right? And therefore, we're not there yet, but we will probably in the coming years because we already started many years ago. We are starting to see that happening, but hopefully we'll see more in the coming years.
It's clear that the ecosystem in Spain is more mature than it is in Portugal, and I think the relationships, Biovance have very strong relationships with Spanish VCs, and there's a lot that we've learned from the ecosystem in Spain. I think to go back to the TTOs and the university level, the commercial maturity, I was actually pretty amazed. I recently gave a lecture to first-year PhD students at the Gulbenkian Institute of Molecular Medicine in Lisbon. Before they even stepped foot into the lab and touched a pipette, they have formal lectures on understanding how to commercialize their research as steps to go from their research to establishing a biotech company. And critically, what a lot of scientists don't appreciate is, I'm not the CEO type of personality, therefore my research can't go anywhere. And I was amazed by, obviously that's something that VCs can support, is to help bring in the right people at the right time that have that understanding. We just need the good science. I was really impressed that universities are, from the very beginning of a PhD program, are really educating the scientists on what's possible. So I think that's a good example of how that sort of how the ecosystem is maturing really at the sort of the foundational level.
There are multiple programs, right? So at the European levels, with a lot of significant funding support to research institutes, actually to foster innovation and to let's say to train researchers, commercialization activities, in tech transfer and so on. So I think it's people are becoming more educated in this regard. So that's super helpful. It is true that the gap still exists, right? So this is not UK in which you can have serial entrepreneurs, that can approach VCs and listen. I mean, I've seen this opportunity, and they actually are very well prepared to and articulated to make a good proposal, right, in which you can definitely invest in. So here still, you have people that understand more and more what it takes to develop a company or to start up a company, but they don't really bring the credentials, right, for you to deploy, several millions, right? So
Yeah.
this is still missing. This is about talent as well, right? So all the sense. So from research, this you need talented researchers, talented physicians, talented entrepreneurs. So sometimes what's missing here is not money; it's really talent. The bottleneck might be there.
So why should pan-European investors start paying attention to Portugal now?
Yeah, I think an important and maybe obvious or not so obvious aspect to mention is cost, right? Lab space here is cheaper. Hiring world-class local talent who have often gone overseas and got PhDs in at Harvard, the likes like Pablo and some of my colleagues. They're somewhat cheaper to hire, and early stage companies are reaching meaningful milestones on non-dilutive public funding before private checks even come in. So that means lower entry valuations, greater capital efficiency, more runway per euro or pound invested. So for an investor thinking about returns, which we all have to think about, that's really significant. I think, the science justifies the attention independently of the cost advantage. We're talking about institutes that have been for a long time publishing in top journals, scientists trained at world leading institutes, and increasingly are choosing to come back and build here, like my colleagues. And I think between Pablo and I, we've emphasized the point that the raw material has always been exceptional, right? What's changing is the infrastructure around it. And funds like ours are part of that infrastructure. I hope we're the first of many, especially in Portugal. The ecosystem's maturing, the signal's getting stronger, and the opportunity for international investors to come in alongside local specialists who do our own de-risking and relationship building is real. And beyond all of that, Portugal's just, a fantastic country. I chose to move here. The weather, the food, the people. So, yeah.
Yeah, I know. I always say I'm super jealous of you, Hannah. Or were you too in Spain as well, Pablo? Because I like Barcelona so well. And I think, Pablo, kind of the last closing ends on you for looking at Spain. And then what if you were looking the next 5 to 10 years? Where do you see the investment opportunities? Where do you see Spain growing?
Sure. I mean, there's a few things I would like to highlight about here. I mean, we have, we're investing in different countries, and every time you invest in another country, you say, well, our country is not that bad. Actually, that's a good thing, actually. And I can give you a few examples. Right. I mean, in terms of clinical research, I mean, Spain is one of the, if not the best, one of the best countries for clinical research in the world. I mean, this is top-notch clinical research. Uh, so the mechanisms are very simple, and if you invest in a company in which you're going to run clinical trials, it facilitates a lot everything. There is and there will be very strong support from investment perspective from the government, so there will be a significant amount of money to deploy in the system, which always helps to match VC funding. From a corporate perspective, someone may expect countries in the south of Europe to be kind of complicated, and I have to say that this is not the case. When you really need to draft a document for transactions, that's very simple. So in terms of opportunities, I mean, we don't have to repeat ourselves on the quality of the science, and there is a very strong VC base in Spain, particularly in Barcelona. So I think it's an simple, let's say, or easy place to look for good opportunities where you can easily syndicate and you can have a long-term partners in the future.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much, Pablo, and thank you so much, Hannah, for joining this podcast and making me incredibly jealous of not living there right now, where it's now about 12 degrees and alternately rainy and sunny in London, and very much wishing I was where both of you are right now as I'm wearing a giant jumper. But thank you so much for joining this episode on investment in the Iberian Peninsula, as well as linking it to the rest of the European ecosystem. If you'd like to listen to more episodes of Denatured, please turn into biospace.com. Thank you.